good to have you with us in this edition of the Urban Debate. Tonight we talk about what could possibly be one of the biggest changes in the Modi government and the cabinet in its second term. The union cabinet will see a major reshuffle tomorrow. It was first earlier expected to be announced day after. It now indicates that the decision may come out tomorrow evening itself. Reports are indicating that LJP and JDU will get a place in the cabinet. Remember, JDU the first time around chose not to be in the cabinet. They were being offered one seat, which they then said will not be taking. LJP, on the other hand, had before state elections in Bihar walked out of the India cabinet. And of course, the one who was part of the cabinet itself, Mr. Ramvilas Paswan, is no more. So that berth is vacant as well. Among others who are in the list of possible inductees include former Assam Minister Sonowal, MPs Jyotiraditya Scindia and Narayan Rane, both of whom are already in the national capital. The probable reasons for the cabinet rejig are actually a culmination of multiple things. Firstly, there are quite a few vacant berths now that need to be filled. In fact, a lot of the key portfolios are being handled by ministers who already have something else on their plate. So there are additional charges for multiple ministers, 28 berths which are vacant for one or the other reason. Then, of course, there are states like Uttar Pradesh that will be going for elections early next year. And so usually you do see a higher representation of a poll-bound state, which is why there is an expectation maybe 1, 2 or 3 people from Uttar Pradesh will get a place somewhere in the cabinet as well. Reward for some of the regional leaders as well, whether it's Jyotiraditya Scindia, who abandoned Congress and joined the BJP, worked for the BJP in the Madhya Pradesh elections. Similarly, Narayan Rane, who's been creating a lot of noise here in Maharashtra, obviously seen as a Sena baiter as well. So, in a sense, these are some of the reasons. It could also be a political exercise to bring in some of the allies' representation. Right now, there is only one ally that's represented in the cabinet. It will be interesting to see if JDU and others can actually change that equation. And of course, one would say and hope that one of the most important reasons is performance of the ministers, and if they've performed well or not well, basis that if they're removed or rewarded in that sense. So Jyotiraditya Scindia is one of the people who may be inducted. You know his history, you know what he's been doing in the recent past as well. Sarbananda Sonowal, who was the former Chief Minister of Assam, replaced by Himanta Biswa Sarma as the Chief Minister, could be inducted. Allies which didn't have berths in the cabinet could be brought in earlier as well. These are some of the key speculative points that have emerged. Tonight we're going to discuss some of this, what it indicates, what's going on within the BJP top leadership camp, what are their thoughts, and what can you expect tomorrow or day after. Let's say good evening to Javed Ansari, senior journalist, Aarti Jairad, Vinod Sharma, political editor for the Hindustan Times, Neeraj Chaudhary, senior journalist, Professor Maninder Thakur, Center for Political Studies at JNU, and the founder for the Bihar Research Group. All of them joining me this evening. Let's begin with Aarti. Aarti, what is that one big thing that you will be watching out for in terms of messaging when this reshuffle takes place?
Well, I think, Tanvi, you covered the points quite well in your introduction. Clearly we're looking, number one, at the messages to UP, because UP polls are due next year. And these are very crucial polls for the BJP, because the BJP must win, especially after, the defeat, what happened in Bengal, which is being seen as a defeat because they had pitched the thing so high. So that's number one. Who are the kind of people they will take in, which is the caste that they want represented in the cabinet. Anupriya Patel, you've got her on your screen right now, represents a very important Kurmi community, and she has, had a one-on-one meeting with Amit Shah. So, these are the kind of messages that we're looking at. Number two is, the messages that the BJP would like to send out to people who left other parties and joined the BJP and have been waiting patiently for their reward for having helped the BJP. And a key person in this is Jyotiraditya Scindia. because if the BJP wants to continue this kind of politics where they break people from other parties to destabilize governments, they would also have to reward those leaders who come over, which they have not done so far. But so I think that's one very key message. And the third key message is, of course, the BJP reaching out to its allies to show that all is well in the NDA and that the NDA is actually expanding. And, I think that's a very critical message at a time when the BJP is facing so much heat from all around on its, poor management of the COVID pandemic. The fact that it failed to, make a dent in Mamta's West Bengal. So I think that it would like to show that the NDA is still pretty, and of course the Akali is working out over the farm bill. So I think it would like to show that the NDA that they are still capable of keeping their allies on board. So these are the three key messages really that we'll be looking for in tomorrow's reshuffle.
So, and I mentioned it in my intro as well, and I want to just focus a bit on that before we go to the bigger political angles here. But one would, as a citizen, assume, Mr. Javed Ansari, that somewhere in this reshuffle is also something linked to performance. For example, there was a lot of buzz about, the health minister and possibly him being changed, somebody else being brought in with the whole COVID conversation, if that's something that the government wants to look at. There's been a lot of criticism, similarly for even the finance minister or the agriculture minister for the handling of the farmer protests and the farm laws situation itself. But all of that seems to be dying out now, and it may not be something that we see happen tomorrow. Is performance a big factor at all this time around?
Look, let me begin with a caveat. It's always very hazardous to try and second guess this prime minister. Every time political pundits have tried it, they've had to eat crow. So I will not, rush into something where angels fear to tread. Having said that, for this to be meaningful and not just be an exercise in filling in the blanks where, you need to bring in an Anupriya Patel or you need to reward Mr. Jyotiraditya Scindia, the important thing will be, like you flagged two ministries, health and finance. What happens? Will the prime minister move any of the big five, big six? I doubt very much. If I was a betting person, I would bet against it. I don't. Now, will he do something with the health ministry? This prime minister would rather beef up, improve performance than try and remove somebody because he believes this is a sign of weakness. This will be seen as admission of failure. So if the past is anything to go by, if his past is anything to go by, I'd be surprised. But then you never know. Yes, you can be fairly certain that Mr. Jyotiraditya Scindia will find place. Anupriya Patel will find place. Mr. Paswan's brother has not been, it is perhaps the worst kept secret. He's tried very hard not to keep this a secret, that he's going to feature in the cabinet reshuffle. The latest being that he went and bought himself a new set of kurta pajamas just to ensure that he's well clad sartorially when he takes the oath tomorrow. So yes, but for it to have some kind of punch, we'll have to wait and see, because the Prime Minister and Mr. Amit Shah, and for that matter, even Mr. Nadda, haven't revealed much. And the Prime Minister's style of functioning is that he keeps everything very close to his chest, and you can keep guessing and keep talking and discussing various combinations and permutations. Just consider it done when it's done.
You're absolutely right. That it's like sometimes a lot of the speculation that happens when we know Prime Minister is going to be addressing the nation, but nobody really knows what it could be about, and then there is this whole guessing game that depends on what time he's going to speak and how important the announcement can be. So I understand where you're coming from. That when it comes to the inside conversations, there could always be a change or a surprise. But Neerja Chaudhary, do you see performance playing a factor? I mean, is the government under that kind of pressure anymore when it comes to economy or farm laws or even COVID management?
Look, I think this is a stock-taking exercise halfway through their term. It comes when they've had many setbacks. The economy has seen a big setback, loss of livelihoods, prices going up, prices of diesel, petrol up hugely, which is going to affect us even more in the coming weeks. COVID, people have lost their lives, their loved ones, there's unhappiness in large parts of the country. So they have to shift gear, they know that. And this is not an exercise only in the cabinet. It's a larger exercise. They're, from all accounts, they are going in for organization reshuffle. The governors were changed today, 8 of them, or, jigged around. So the whole thing has to be seen in that context. Now, I agree with Javed that you cannot second guess this Prime Minister. He likes to keep everything under the wraps. He particularly likes to surprise the media in Delhi. He catch them off guard. But yet, I don't remember cabinet exercises having this kind of, for hours and hours with a large group of their insiders going into every detail, performance-wise, department-wise, state-wise, in the state, Bundelkhand, Western UP, what is the best, who are the people we have, how do we jig it around? So, normally prime ministers have had their principal secretary or one or two people, they get together, one or two people, put out the list of those who will be inducted and those who will be dropped. Now, this is a new kind of thing we've seen in recent days, and this is part of the search for a new theme, a new surge forward, keeping in mind, let's be very clear, on winning the 2021 elections, 2022 elections, 2023 elections, and certainly having in mind the Lok Sabha elections in 2024. So even the performance part of it, and I hear they bring in many young faces, more women, try and placate the Dalits who have been unhappy in certain parts. But all of it will go to, as I say, the Prime Minister putting out a new narrative or trying to put it out in light of the setbacks that they've had in West Bengal and with COVID handling. So it's in the larger picture that we will need to see, where a Jyotirgaditya Sindhya fits in, where an Anupriya Patel fits in, where others, of course promises have to be kept, and that's a signal to those who may be potential entrants, who may be waiting to see, should I join BJP or not? What will I get out of it? If others who've gone in are rewarded well, then that's an incentive. So that's also a kind of a subset signal that they will be sending out.
Yes, definitely that kind of a messaging for those who may be considering following in the footsteps of Scindia or anybody else as to what is in store for the BJP. But let's now focus, Mr. Vinod Sharma, on one of the key aspects, which is Uttar Pradesh election. That's the other big one that's slotted. We're already seeing all kinds of preparation taking place for Punjab, but Uttar Pradesh would be the next one. Who and how do you see the BJP handle that piece in terms of bringing certain names or castes on board?
Well, there are always two dimensions to a cabinet expansion and reshuffle. One is administrative, the other is political. And I think instead of guessing what the Prime Minister will do, it's better to discuss what he should do as per our perspectives, I mean, this is coming in the backdrop of an economic downturn, in the backdrop of massive unemployment, the vaccine distribution mess up which happened, and also the COVID challenge that our country is facing. So I think the Prime Minister today requires not just to placate social groups, but he also has to make real his promise of Vikas or development. And how will he handle the economy? I believe that the Prime Minister requires, by way of lateral entries, some technocrats into his team. In recent years, the BJP has lost a lot of very fine minds, who were not essentially politicians. They were technocrats, they were economists, Some of them are now advisors to M.K. Stalin in Tamil Nadu. I think that there was a talk in between that the Prime Minister wanted to make lateral inductions in his ministerial team. But instead, we saw lateral inductions happening in the bureaucracy. Now, I think that this experiment of lateral inductions in bureaucracy can be taken, can be stretched to lateral inductions in ministerial posts. Narasimha Rao, when he was faced with a major challenge, he promoted Manmohan Singh as finance minister, who was already there in the government, thanks to Mr. Chandrasekhar. So I personally feel that social groups, placating social groups, accommodating social groups is one.
We seem to have lost that line with Mr. Vinod Sharma. The feed is frozen. Going to try and get him back. But let me also go across to Professor Maninder Thakur. Professor Thakur, would you want to weigh in on how you see the UP aspect being handled? And then we'll also then move on to see to talk about how the Bihar allies are being, patronized.
Yeah, I think in UP, definitely there is a tough time as the news coming from the ground that there is some problem inside the party also. And after this Bengal election debacle, it seems one of the dimensions that we need to check is if there is a pressure from within in the party, and therefore a pressure to accommodate some more faces that is coming up in UP. So definitely there is a new alliance, but I would agree with Nirja ji that this also indicates that the party is working on a new narrative, the narrative that has to be a mixture of the nationalism and religious issues, plus the development issues. I think on the development issues, probably the party has realized in Bengal, there were issues there which they could not highlight that well. So maybe this is also indicating that party is creating this new narrative. Among all the ministers, I don't think performance seems to be a big issue because the functioning of the cabinet is quite centralized, looks like at least. Except the HRD ministry, I think there's a lot of humor around that HRD minister might be changed. Otherwise, I don't think it's a performance thing is coming up in a big way. It's more like creating a new narrative and managing the groups in UP, and that seems to be more important.
So when you say managing the groups in UP, what is it that you are talking about? Because there are many names that are doing the rounds as possible inductees. Apart from Anupriya Patel, there's also Ram Shankar Kateria, Anil Jain, Rita Bahuguna Joshi, Zafar Islam, or even Varun Gandhi. What does this tell us about what the party may be thinking?
I think it seems in UP there is a discontent within the party also, apart from the allies. And the caste accommodation of the caste equation within the party seems to be disbalanced. So there could be some faces which can give representation to the caste. That seems to be in offing because there is too much of dominance of particular caste, at least perception-wise. So the BJP's internal caste alliance seems to have some kind of trouble. So maybe that accommodation might take place. So maybe these known names might not come in the final go, as everybody is saying that it is difficult to predict the Prime Minister. It's entirely possible that some new names might come up who could be seen as representing different caste groups.
Okay, so let's talk about two of those names, Aarti Jairaj, that two or three actually, which are almost certain. They seem to be headed to the national capital. Narayan Rane, Jyotiraditya Scindia, and Mr. Sonowal. With Scindia and Rane, do you think that this is not just about a reward in terms of joining the party, but also the noise they may have already ended up creating?
Look, I do believe that much more than performance, cabinet reshuffles, cabinet rejigs are driven by political compulsions. I think, political compulsions are the main reason why prime ministers go in for reshuffles. And if you look at reshuffles through the, different tenures of different prime ministers, whether it was Vajpayee or it was, Manmohan Singh and now Narendra Modi. It's always been trying to accommodate different factions of the party or different allies or different social groups, within the cabinet so that you can, keep everything together. So I think that political compulsions are very, very important. Now, as far as Jyotiraditya Scindia is concerned, look, the fact is that he did the BJP a huge service by bringing down that Madhya Pradesh government and helping them to, sort of come into power through the back door, an election which they had lost, but they are now today ruling in Madhya Pradesh. Now, they made him a Rajya Sabha, MP, but obviously he feels he deserves more. And, as somebody mentioned, there are others who are waiting in line, who the BJP is trying to woo, who, are thinking of joining the BJP. And they're all looking at what the BJP does to reward Jyotiraditya Scindia before they decide whether they should take the plunge or not. So Jyotiraditya Scindia's induction, the rank that he's given, the portfolio that he's given, these will all be important messages for the BJP's future politics. As they look to get more and more people in from other parties, to strengthen their own benches, and also to weaken, opposition parties, particularly a party like the Congress, which is still considered the main national challenger because it is the only other national force in the country apart from the BJP. So that is a very, very important signal. And as I said, it's not just his induction. I think what we need to see also is the level at which he's inducted and what is the portfolio that he's going to be given. And the same thing with Narayan Rane. Maharashtra, there's a lot of, a lot of stuff is happening in Maharashtra. Sharad Pawar is very active. Uddhav Thakur is very active. We're hearing a lot of mixed messages from the Shiv Sena. Devendra Fadnavis is very active. And, Narayan Rane obviously, is also, making a lot of noise. And, he has been very frustrated. After all, he left the Congress, joined the BJP, and he expected some reward. Yes, he's got a Rajya Sabha berth and his son, has been accommodated as well. But I think he sees bigger things for himself. So again, these are all, look, if the BJP is going to draw on other parties to weaken them, then, they have to reward people they have taken in. For 2.5 years, the Prime Minister has done nothing because he was coasting along on the strength of his 2019 victory. And, there didn't seem to be any reason for him to give in to these pulls and pressures. But today, I think it's a different Narendra Modi. After the kind of negative, narrative that has been going on about his handling of COVID, and of course the debacle in Bengal and, the state of the economy. So, it is a very different Narendra Modi and, he has to show, he has to compromise more and show a spirit of accommodation that all prime ministers in the past have shown whenever they have done their cabinet reshuffle, which Narendra Modi did not feel the need to do since 2019 when he came back with that thumping majority.
Right.
But I think today he feels that compulsion. And that is really what we are going to see in this cabinet reshuffle. What are the compulsions that he feels? And I agree with Javed on this, that, he's not a person that we should second guess because he loves to surprise us. So, although some things are quite obvious, but it's quite possible that he will take in a couple of technocrats as well. I mean, he is very, very happy with Hardeep Puri's performance, for instance. And Hardeep Puri is not a politician. He came in from the bureaucracy. So it's quite possible that there are a couple of such names tucked away, somewhere in in the Prime Minister's cupboard, which
Right.
he will pull out tomorrow. So and that is where we will see maybe the tweaking of performance, when he brings in those couple of technocrats. And one name I'm hearing is this Ashwini, I'm forgetting his name, but Ashwini something, who is an MP from Orissa in the Rajya Sabha, and, was in the IAS, very close to the BJP, very close to Narendra Modi, and at one point was being pitched as the railway minister. It didn't happen. But again, this is one technocrat who could come in, again, in an effort for the Prime Minister to boost up the the performance of his government, which is come in for a lot of criticism.
Yes, I think you're referring to Ashwini Vaishnav.
That's
Yes.
Ashwini Vaishnav. That's,
Yes.
his name was just slipping my mind.
Right.
But I mean, his name is very much there in circulation too. And he would be like, in the Hardeep Puri category, a technocrat.
Yes, a few months ago, weeks ago, there have always been these little testing the work on type of pieces that have emerged, even for KV Kamat's name for the finance ministry, or even Dr. Devi Shetty's name to be brought on to the health side. But it really, I mean, I'm not going to hazard any guess on those fronts anymore. We'll wait and watch and see what happens tomorrow. Is it a good idea, though, Nirja, to have few more technocrats? Would it help the Modi government in these slightly more tough times?
Yeah, you're right. KV Kamat's name has been there for a very long time. For some reason, he couldn't come. It was said at one time that the Prime Minister wanted him. Nirmala Sitharaman now is much more firmly ensconced in the finance ministry. The big thing, the real challenges ahead, as far as, what social representation will do for the BJP is one part of the story. But for you and me, we want to know what is there in it for us. How is our life going to be different as a result of this cabinet reshuffle that the Prime Minister is jigging around he does? So the two challenges are on the economic front and on the health front. So I would wait to see really, while the Prime Minister is not given to changing people, even though, they have been found wanting. Harshvardhan has been a very, very decent figure, a man who was held in high regard by the people of Delhi and generally for his integrity. But will the Prime Minister give a signal by bringing in somebody in health to say, to concede that mistakes were made and we are now shifting here? I would look for that signal. Will he do that? Because health will continue to be a big issue, and really want to say, I mean business on health. Secondly, I think another shift that's taking place is vis-a-vis the allies. The Shiv Sena left the BJP. They are Kali Dal. These two were its oldest allies over the decades. Both have left. But it is now wanting to say to the allies, we want to. For the last couple of years, it has been unmindful of their sensibilities. At least that's what they have felt. But now I think it's reaching out again, the allies. And they will need the allies. It realizes that, particularly after Bengal, keeping in mind 2024, and even some elections before that. So how does it deal with Janata Dal, U? Janata Dal U is bargaining very hard, as it's always done. Now, JDU has its own problems. There's a limit to which they'll be able to do. Suppose they get only 1 or 2 seats, they may have a revolt within the party, which is what they would want to avoid. On the other hand, if they push the envelope too much and don't go into government and the BJP says, okay, so be it, then the BJP can go ahead and break their party at a future date. So it's a difficult one for the JDU also and for the BJP to find some kind of an accommodating formula where both are happy and reconciled to it. But it's important for the JDU at this stage to come into the alliance, to give it new energy at the center.
Professor Thakur, would you like to weigh in on this as well? JDU that did stay out of the cabinet in 2019 when BJP got the overwhelming majority and came to power. What would they like now this time around? What would JDU want?
I think JDU definitely would like to have more than one seat. I mean, four is the ideal for JDU, or if still BJP insist on one seat, then probably this time also JDU would like to keep itself away. But there are a lot of power centers inside JDU, and it will be very difficult to manage for the chief minister. But also one has to see that in Bihar, the rumors are always there that there is a kind of negotiation between different parties. The parties may break down, something might happen. So to keep JDU together also, there is a need to have certain kind of representation in the cabinet. So this is the dilemma that the chief minister is facing. Plus from Bihar, I think Sushil Modi is waiting in the queue. You have not mentioned his name, but he was a very important figure in the last elections, and he remains a powerful person in BJP in Bihar, and he was not given anything. So we are expecting that he might be in the cabinet. Bihar, both BJP and JDU have several power centers. And so it is entirely possible that you will get more seats from Bihar in the cabinet. Also because BJP has huge ambition in Bihar, and looking at Bengal, it seems BJP will have to work more in Bihar situation. And if RJD remains a main rival and with weak JDU, then BJP's work is enhanced. So there is a possibility that from BJP itself, one or two person from Bihar might be inducted in the government, apart from JDU. If JDU gets 3 even, probably that would be good for JDU. If not, then it will be very difficult for JDU to manage. And I think on the Ramvilas front, as it is clear that probably Chirag is out of favor and somebody else is in, so one seat might go to them. And I think Chirag did not come out from the cabinet, means his father did not come out from the cabinet. He passed away, right? So it's not that Chirag revolted against the government at the center. It was just the local rearrangement. That too, the strong rumor was that it was done on behalf of BJP. So we do not know even now whether BJP is favoring the present leader or Chirag. So we don't know exactly. So we are keeping our fingers crossed there. So let us think that in BJP, this expansion of cabinet will have little more to say on Bihar.
Right. Well, so like you mentioned, more representation from the BJP Bihar unit. Sushil Modi, very important for the party there, did, great amount, delivered in big ways, but was kept out of the Bihar cabinet. So there is an expectation that he's brought along. JDU as a sign that we do value our allies and we are willing to now give them some place. So maybe that. On the LJP front, there seems to be some confusion, Mr. Vinod Sharma, whether they're going to go along with Pashupati or with Chirag camp. Today, Chirag Paswan came out and made this whole announcement that we've told them very clearly Pashupati cannot be inducted in the name of LJP because he's no more of the party if they want to bring him. Otherwise, that's their choice. Is that something that the BJP wants to wade into right now, the whole family fight for the party?
Well, it's going to be very dicey for them to do that. And first of all, I want to ask a question. How many people will you have from Bihar?
Yeah.
Already there are a couple of ministers, maybe more. Mr. Singh is there, the power minister, and there's another minister from the Thakur community. Now, the point is that if you are going to have half a dozen ministers from Bihar, where do you accommodate other states? And Bihar is not headed for elections immediately. So, if one has to guess, then surely they have to give accommodation to Janata Dal United. They offered them just one cabinet berth with 16 seats in the beginning of 2019, and that is why Nitish Kumar refused. And Nitish Kumar is perhaps the only leader amongst the allies of the BJP who can bargain and get his pound of flesh, which he has been getting from the BJP, because BJP has had an experience with him where he crossed over and joined Lalu Yadav's party and set up an alternative government and won an election. So the point is that how many people will you have from Bihar? And also, I think the focus will be greater, in my assessment, should be greater, I don't know what he'll do, on Uttar Pradesh, on Punjab, on Himachal. Mr. JP Nadda was a cabinet minister from Himachal. He ceased to be a cabinet minister. He's now the party chief. The prime minister himself is from UP. His defense minister is from UP. But he has to get a prominent Brahmin face from Uttar Pradesh. Now, who is that prominent Brahmin face? Who can be? I don't see very many prominent Brahmin faces in Uttar Pradesh these days. So, it's a difficult task in terms of social composition for the Prime Minister. But I think that he should front load the governance aspect of his government, which is under serious question. You know, you can't just be giving faces which have a social significance without any governance acumen. And what he needs is some good people with good governance acumen. If he allows them to function independently, they would be force multipliers for his government. You see, this is also an exercise for an image makeover for Mr. Modi. After a series of setbacks on the health front, on the economic front, on the vaccination front, on so many fronts, and also foreign policy front. I wonder whether he'll go to change the foreign minister, which he won't, because he's a technocrat, a foreign secretary. But I don't rate these IAS officers as technocrats. I mean, when I say technocrats, I talk about people of the stature of Raghuram Rajan or Arvind Subramaniam, who are now working for a state government. So that means that they're keen to work in India, but they didn't find adequate ambience and work culture for them to continue with the BJP under the BJP dispensation. Urjit Patel also left. But this government requires these people to repair the economy. The biggest question is the repairing of the economy. You see, inflation is going sky high. Petrol prices are unaffordable. Jobs are going. The economy, the GDP goes up and comes down, goes up and comes down. And there is this threat, as you were yourself saying in the opening while giving other news about what's happening around India, that the third wave is almost real. So the point is that if the third wave is real, now to change Mr. Harshvardhan would be grossly unfair. Mr. Harshvardhan was never a free agent as health minister in my assessment, because much of the policy decisions were being made at the level of the Prime Minister on the advice of people sitting in the Niti Aayog. So why to blame this person?
So Mr. Sharma, let me ask you this question. Who are these underperformers and you think that do need a relook? Or putting it another way, who are the outperformers and the better performers who are safe for now?
You see, frankly, may I tell you one thing? It's not proper for me to sit in judgment over ministers. But I can only point out that these are the areas where they need some fresh inductions and some people with original thinking, This government has been continuing for the past more than almost 2 years now, on the basis of winning elections. Now is the time for this government, apart from winning elections, to be able to win some accolades on the governance front. This second term of Mr. Modi has been full of pitfalls, not entirely of his making, but this pandemic has really presented serious challenges to him, to his government, like to governments across the globe. Similarly, the promise of jobs is not being delivered. On the contrary, jobs have gone away. Then you have this issue of vaccination. We do not know whether we are prepared enough to vaccinate our entire population for the herd immunity to set in, And then this is this talk of various COVID variants, and then whether the current vaccines would be able to tackle them. So he requires in the health
Right. Oh,
a serious change of guard. He requires in railways a serious change of guard. He requires, in my view, on the finance front a serious change of guard, on the commerce front a serious change of guard, and even on the foreign policy front, maybe he can do some creative thinking, because our foreign policy initiatives have been less than mediocre.
okay. But there have been so far, Mr. Javed Ansari, no such indications or significant people movements that would perhaps indicate that these, at least the big four, are up for any kind of change.
Yes, like I said at the outset, I'd be very surprised. And for this to be really meaningful, at least the big four or big five, that pack has to be reshuffled, and I don't see that happening. Yes, what might happen is that the HRD minister, you might have Mr. Jyotiraditya Scindia or somebody else. I'm just thinking, I'm just speaking out of that. Maybe a Jyotiraditya Scindia there or somebody there, but the big 4-5 will not change. But yes, there are some obvious social messaging that he has to do in UP, like Vinod was saying. Yes, everybody talks of the need. There is this big push from the BJP side to try and rejig the imbalance that has taken place in Uttar Pradesh. The Uttar Pradesh government has come to be identified either by accident or by design with a particular class, the Brahmins, who wield a tremendous amount of influence, far greater in proportion to their numbers or percentage. They are feeling left out, and that needs to be redressed. So they are trying to bring in people at the level of the state. They also will need to be able to bring in some faces here at the center. But who will that be? Because I can't think of one gem that has been left out. If they bring into who they bring into the government will suddenly make it shine. There is no crown in the jewel. But yes, perhaps maybe Rita Bahugna. If you just want to send a message, then perhaps it's Rita Bahugna. She has the right linkages. Her father was chief minister, a very popular chief minister. That many believe he was the best chief minister UP had, but that was her father. She has to. So Anupriya Patel is an obvious one, because the Kurmis have to be, that social imbalance needs to be addressed as well. But other than that, well, one will need to really watch out on who the Prime Minister pulls out of his hat. He often does that, but I don't see any of the big 4 or 5 being changed or being moved around.
Okay, let me put it around in a different manner and then ask this question, Professor Thakur, and then to Aarti Jairat. Professor Thakur, to you first. That the last time around when UP results came out, there was this whole conversation and narrative that was built of how people have voted cutting across caste barriers or even religion barriers, and it's just been largely a BJP and a Modi vote that has come through. Things are different this time around in UP. Does the party now realize that they would have to go back to that kind of conventional caste-based politics again, or identity-based politics again?
I think even last time, if you look at the undercurrents, it was a kind of micro caste management. Even if bigger narrative was that it's Modi's vote for Modi or whatever, but undercurrent suggests that it was the disgruntled caste communities that was united by micromanagement. So that remains always there. And over the years, I think a new factor that has come, which was not there at that time in a big way, is the new chief minister. And now there is advantage of that, and there is a disadvantage of that also. Some groups have been consolidated, but as it is said, that the Brahmins are basically they hold good power in UP, and they are not very happy with the current situation. So there are other problems within different castes also. So I think that need to be accommodated. I don't think I would agree that probably big 5 will not be changed, might not be changed, and it will be basically accommodating different representations and just expansion of the cabinet instead of reshuffling that much, except one or two. I think, as it is rightly said, that the cabinet functions in such a centralized way that to hold one minister responsible for whatever has happened is very difficult. Like, for instance, to say that health minister has not been able to perform would be not only unfair, it is also analytically not correct. So I think maybe it's just kind of expansion instead of reshuffling in that sense, except one that is in big rumor about the HRD minister, and maybe Jyotiraditya Scindia becomes the HRD minister. I mean, well, that's a wild guess, and nobody knows about that. HRD has always been a problem for this government since beginning, and they have not been able to fix that up. The rest will be based on politics of representation, and UP, of course, will get a great share. But my hunch is that if they are also planning for 224 elections, then they will have to look at the Bihar seriously. I'm not sure how much seats could be given to Bihar, but some kind of arrangement that can keep the house in order in the state is required. Because if they don't get enough number from Bihar in the parliamentary election, that will be a problem for the party. So if that is what is also on the agenda, not only the UP election, about which nobody knows who wants what in terms of UP situation, as a lot of conflict is there within the party itself. I'm going by the rumor only. I don't have solid research on this to say anything concrete way. Yeah, but I think that's we may see just not reshuffling. We may see just expansion of the cabinet.
Okay, just an expansion of the cabinet, maybe not basis on performance or non-performance, but a few of the things that do need to be addressed. Aarti, but specifically on the UP front, would you like to weigh in? And I asked this question again because there was so much of this conversation of how, you know, caste doesn't matter anymore and identity doesn't matter anymore, and that's the thing of the past. Yet, you know, we still keep talking about it.
No, absolutely. And I think, you know, what it really shows is the sort of failure of the Hindutva project in UP. Yogi Adityanath was made chief minister because it was felt that the BJP won in UP so handsomely on a pro-Hindu wave. It was a, very strong Hindu sentiment. And, the prime minister's campaign through those elections, you remember when he, talked about Kabristan and, Shamshan Ghat and, stuff like that. So, I think there was the Yogi Adityanath was actually supposed to represent the start of a Hindutva project in UP. And, I think what has happened is that project has unraveled, and instead of which we are seeing, sort of caste fragmentation, of the BJP support base, because, it's seen as a Thakur Raj rather than a Hindu or Hindutva government. And this has alienated not just the Brahmins, the Jats are up in arms, the Kurmis are up in arms, the Dalits are up in arms, many of the sort of lower castes, the Nishads and all, they are up in arms. So, the BJP has to repair all that and, so to kind of get that Hindutva project back on track. I don't know if they can do it with a, cabinet reshuffle, through which they will send out this social messaging by inducting, representatives of these caste groups who have, got disenchanted with Yogi's government. I don't know whether cabinet reshuffle is good enough, but maybe it's the beginning, because they will have to do a lot of repairing on the ground in UP, and they will have to find a way of restraining Yogi from carrying on with this Thakur Raj that he has done for the last 4 years, and bring him back on track to the the Hindutva project. And, that is going to be difficult. And let's see how Modi and Amit Shah manage that. it's going to be interesting to see over the next 6 to 8 months.
Okay, I think it's going to be extremely interesting from here on up to not just the Punjab elections, but also the Uttar Pradesh elections. And one big factor last time that many said was also the surgical strikes that had happened just a few months before the UP polls, and that perhaps helped them consolidate a bit. That's not there this time, so they will have to do a lot of this political engineering. Completely out of time. Thank you to all the esteemed panelists for joining me on this conversation. We find out tomorrow, most probably, on what happens as far as the cabinet reshuffle is concerned. There are 28 cabinet berths which are vacant right now. Not necessarily that the government fills up all of them, but there are quite a few open spots which will be. Most of it seems to be a political exercise, but like any of our senior journalists would now tell you, that beyond a point, nobody wants to hazard a guess or speculate what the Modi government might end up doing in such scenarios. So if there is a big change, we'll only wait and find out tomorrow. But to keep their allies happy, to keep in mind the poll-bound states and the on-ground situation there, to also reward some of those who've left other parties, especially the Congress party or even their other rivals, and have joined the BJP in the last few months and have worked hard, may be rewarded, to also send a signal that they're open to more inclusion now than they were perhaps in 2019, and maybe a few switches in the name of performance or non-performance. Let's wait and watch. Thank you so much for joining us on this conversation.